Okay, so this was a written by Benjamin Franklin, and that's not important. What's important is you just have to understand what it's saying and how it's written, so you can refer back quickly as you're answering the questions that's going to be asked. All right, so table of proportions of marriages to births, comma, see, pay attention to punctuation, of marriages to the number of inhabitants, comma, and etc., formed on observations made upon the bills of mortality, christenings of popular, etc., and etc., of populous cities. Okay, so far, it just says the table of proportions of marriages to births, so a proportion of marriage to births, of debts to birth, marriages to the number of inhabitants, and etc., formed on observations made upon the bills of mortality, okay, christenings in a populous cities. So far it said a lot of stuff, but it really didn't tell you all for what, and it tells you right here. So it says all these things will not suit countries, all right, semicolon, nor will tables form the observations made on full settled old countries as Europe suit new countries as America. Okay, so all these things will not suit countries or observations on full settled old countries. You can't apply the same rules to a new country, such as America. Back then, America was a new country. It's fairly new now, in the grand scheme of history. A lot of countries today are, centuries and millennia old. For people increase in proportion to the number of marriages, comma. Okay, so that's a complete thought. And that is greater in proportion to the ease and convenience of supporting a family. Okay, I'm gonna read that again. People increase in proportion to the number of marriages. And this idea right here, that people increase in proportion to the number of marriages, and that is greater. What is greater? This idea is greater in proportion to the ease and convenience of supporting a family. When families can be easily supported, more persons marry and earlier in life. Okay, that's something to think about. In cities, comma, where all trades, comma, occupations and offices are full, comma, many delay marrying till they can see how to bear charges of a family, semicolon. Okay, so that's a complete thought. Which charges are greater in cities as luxuries is more common. Is that true today? Well, absolutely. You have more amenities and luxuries in the city than you do living out in the rural areas. Many live single during life and continue servants to families, journeymen to trades, and etc. All right. Also, when we're going over these things, I'm gonna highlight the words that I want you to add to your lexicon. The more words you know what it means, the easier it's gonna be to understand people. Because when you're listening to people speak and they say a word that you don't know what it means, and you just nod your head to say, you didn't get the fullness of their message. So I want you to add these words to your lexicon as we go. So this word hence right here, it means for this reason. Okay, so the definition of it, so you can just substitute it back into the text. Okay, so I'm gonna read it again. It says luxuries are more common. Many live single during life and continue servants to families. Okay, so back then people were servants to certain families. The words servant and slave are interchangeable in the scope of history. The word slave has such a repugnant connotation these days, in our culture, because of the narrative behind slavery. But a slave is just a servant. You can call an employee a servant. Employee is a hired servant nonetheless, but a servant nonetheless. All right, so it says, and continue servants to families, journeymen to trades, and etc. For this reason. For what reason? For what reason? Okay. And luxuries are more common. Many single during life and etc. Cities do not by natural generation supply themselves with inhabitants. And the debts are more than the births. Okay. So what it's saying is that in the cities, there are not a lot of opportunities there are not a lot of economic opportunities. So because of that, people delay marriage until they can get in an economically viable situation for themselves so they can support a family. So that's what it's saying right here. So for these reasons, cities do not by natural generation supply themselves with inhabitants. The debts are more than the births. And countries full settled, the case must be nearly the same. Okay, so what they're saying is you have this condition in the cities where all these offices and trades are full. So by consequence, you don't have a high birth rate because the marriage rate is low. And what it's saying is in countries that are fully settled, the case must nearly be the same. All lands being occupied and improved to the heights. Those who cannot get land must labor for those that have it. It's the same dynamic today. If you don't have a business, you got to work for somebody that has a business. Back then, what was the economy? It was mostly agriculture. So if you don't have your own land, you have to work the land of somebody else that has land. So that's what it's saying. When laborers are plenty, their wages will be low. By low wages, a family is supported with difficulty. This difficulty deters many from marriage, who therefore long continue servants and single. Okay, let me pause right here, right quick. All right. So I'm sorry about that. So it says, in all countries full settled, the case must be nearly the same. All lands being occupied and improved to the heights. Those who cannot get land must labor for others that have it. When laborers are plenty, their wages will be low. By low wages, a family is supported with difficulty. This difficulty deters many from marriage, who therefore long continue servants and single. All right, so look at this right here. So this was a little choppy. Okay, as far as it was written. So you got a semicolon right here. So you got a complete thought. Well, no, this is not a complete thought. This is a continuation of a thought. Okay, it says this deters many from marriage, who therefore long continue servants and single. Okay, so what is it talking about? Who is the many that are deterred from marriage? And because they're deterred from marriage, they long continue servants and they stay single. All right? Is this what we're seeing today? Is this the same situation or circumstances that we're seeing today? People talk about the wages are low. And why is that? Because it said the laborers are plenty. So this is the consequence of opening the door to a whole bunch of laborers. When you open the door and you saturate the market with labor, the cost of labor goes down. And this is just a basic economic principle, supply and demand. The more scarce something is, the more valuable it's gonna be. So you really have to think about these things when you're watching something on the news or anything. I keep saying that all problems are economic problems, and economics is just the management of resources in a household. That's what oikos is, house, and nomos, the rule of the house. The law, the rule of the house. How things operate in the household. So all these problems are just economics. And if you understand basic economics, you'll understand what the bickering is about, and you'll understand what you need to do. Only as cities take supplies from people from the country and thereby make a little more room in the country. Marriage is a little more encouraged there, where? In these cities that take supplies from people in the country. Okay? Marriages encourage more there, and births exceed the deaths. Okay? So, look at it. It says, only as the cities take supplies of people from the country and thereby make a little more room in the country, marriage is a little more encouraged there, and the births exceed the deaths. Okay, let's see. Only as the cities take supplies of people from the country. Okay, and it says, and thereby make a little more room in the country. Okay, so you're taking people out of the country and putting them into the city. Marriage is a little more encouraged there, and the births exceed the death. So I'm thinking that this is talking. I made a mistake. This there is talking about the country, because we're seeing in the cities are already oversaturated with laborers. So that's discouraging marriage and birth rates. Europe is generally full settled with husbandmen, manufacturers, etc., and therefore cannot now much increase in people. Okay, you see this right here? It's generally full settled with husbandmen, manufacturers, and therefore cannot now much increase in people because it's full. Okay, America is chiefly occupied by Indians who subsist mostly by hunting. Okay, so add this word to your lexicon. Subsist means to continue on, to persist. Okay, so it says America is chiefly occupied by Indians who continue on mostly by hunting. But as the hunter, comma, of all men. Okay, so if you're in a hurry, some of these little phrases, these phrases in between a complete thought, you can kind of just skip over the commas and just complete the thought. So it says, but as the hunter requires the greatest quantity of land from where to draw his subsistence. I want you to add this as well to your lexicon. Subsistence, what does it mean? Competent provisions, means of supporting life, so your livelihood. Okay, but as the hunter requires the greatest quantity of land from where to draw his livelihood, the husbandman, you got to know what this means. It says a farmer, a cultivator, a tiller of the ground, one who labors in tillage. So basically a farmer. That's what a husbandman is. Somebody that tills or cultivates the ground. A husbandman. The husbandman subsisting. Okay, what does this mean? Subsisting, surviving, or carrying on much less. All right, so this is parentheses right here. Okay, so I'm going to skip over this and start again. But as the hunter requires the greatest quantity of land from where to draw his livelihood, the Europeans found America as fully settled as it well could be by hunters. Okay, I'm going to read that again. But as the hunter requires the greatest quantity of land from where to draw his subsistence, the Europeans found America as fully settled as it well could be by hunters. Okay, yet these having large tracts were easily prevailed on to do part with portions of territory to the newcomers who did not much interfere with the natives in hunting and furnished them with many things they wanted. Okay, so let's read what was in between these thoughts. All right, it says, but as the hunter of all men. Okay, then it says the husbandman. It says, but as the hunter of all men requires the greatest quantity of land from where to draw his subsistence. And then you have a parenthesis, the husbandman. What does a husbandman mean? Did we say that? Okay, we already said what that means. So add that to your lexicon. Subsisting on much less. They garner on still less. and the manufacturer requiring least of all. So the manufacturer just needs a plot of land, to put a building on it. So they don't need much land when you're manufacturing things, because it's kind of like concentrated in the building. The Europeans found America as fully settled as it well could be by hunters. Okay, let's carry along. Land thus being plenty in America, comma, and so cheap that a laboring man that understands husbandry can in a short time save enough money to purchase a piece of new land sufficient for a plantation whereon he may subsist a family. Okay, that's a complete thought. Such what? A laboring man. Such are not afraid to marry. For if they even look far enough forward to consider how their children, when grown up, are to be provided for, they see that more land is to be had at rates equally easy, all circumstances considered. Okay, so husbandry. Husbandry is frugality, domestic economy, good management, thrift, the business of a farmer, comprehending agriculture or tilling the ground and raising and managing and fattening cattle or other domestic animals. Okay, so that's the management of what's ever on his land. Okay, that's what husbandry is. The management of what is in his vicinity. Now you kind of get an idea of the word husband. The manager, the lord over the land, or what's in his vicinity, what's in his ownership. That's what the word husbandry means. Okay, so hence marriages in America are more general and more generally early than in Europe. And if it is reckoned, okay, if it is considered, and if it is considered that there is one marriage per annum, that means per year, among 100 persons. Okay, so it's just painting a scenario. Okay, so one marriage per annum among 100 persons. Perhaps we may reckon 2, okay, in America. Okay, so it's talking about then in Europe. So it says marriages in America are more general and more early than in Europe. Why is that? Because the resources in Europe are scarcer. That's basically the point of this. And it is reckoned there that there is but one marriage per annum among 100 persons. Perhaps we may reckon 2. And if in Europe they have but 4 births to a marriage, many of their marriages being late, look at parentheses, we may here reckon 8, of which if 1/2 grow up and our marriages are made, reckoning one with another at 20 years of age, our people must at least be doubled every 20 years. So population growth was very important to Mr. Ben Franklin, as we can see. He wrote a whole essay about this. Add this word right here to the lexicon, but notwithstanding. It means without being prevented, despite, right? In spite of what was just said. Okay, but despite this, but notwithstanding, but despite this increase, but despite this increase, so vast is the territory of North America. Okay, listen, it's introducing. It says, but. What does but mean? But means in contrast to what was previously said. Okay, but despite this increase, okay, so vast is the territory of North America that it will require many ages to settle it fully. Until it is fully settled, labor will never be cheap here, where no man continues a long laborer for others, but gets a plantation of his own. No man continues a long journeyman to a trade, but goes amongst those new settlers and sets up for himself. Okay, so what it's saying is that, land here, there's so much land, right, that eventually it says that until it is fully settled. It says labor will never be cheap here. Why? Why will labor never be cheap? Because there's so much to do, and there's so few people to do it. Okay, so labor will never be cheap here, where no man continues long a labor for others. So a man is not going to continue laboring for others, but eventually he'll get a plantation of his own. Why? Because there's so much land and it's so cheap. That's what he's saying. No man continues a long journey to a trade, but goes among those new settlers and sets up for himself. Okay, so what it's saying is that you have a journeyman, an apprentice, and he's learning, he's working under somebody, he's the help to somebody, to a craftsman or a tradesman. And when more settlers come, then they need that tradesman, so they're going to employ the services of that tradesman. That's what this is saying. But goes among those new settlers and sets up for himself. So now instead of the journeyman, he becomes the master, and etc. Hence, labor is no cheaper now in Pennsylvania than it was 30 years ago, though so many thousands of laboring people have been imported. The danger, therefore, of these colonies interfering with their mother country in trades that depend on labor, manufacturers, etc., is too remote to require attention from Great Britain. But, remember, but means in contrast to what was already said. But in proportion to the increase of the colonies, a vast demand is growing for British manufacturers. Okay? A glorious market, wholly. Okay, you need to add this to your lexicon. Wholly means, it means to the entire extent, or to the full, or completely. Okay? So this says, but in proportion to the increase of colonies, a vast demand is growing for British manufacturers. A glorious market completely in the power of Britain, in which foreigners cannot interfere, which will increase in a short time, even beyond her power of supplying, though her whole trade should be to her colonies. Therefore, Britain should not too much restrain manufacturers in her colonies. Okay, look, therefore, what does therefore mean? It's because of this, what was previously said. So what was previously said? It says that, but in proportion to the increase of the colonies, a vast demand is growing for British manufacturers. A glorious market completely in the power of Britain, in which foreigners cannot interfere, which will increase in a short time, even beyond her power of supplying, though her whole trade should be to her colonies. Therefore, Britain should not too much restrain manufacturers in her colonies. A wise and good mother will not do it. To distress is to weaken, and to weaken the children weakens the whole family. Besides, if the manufacturers of Britain, look at this parentheses, by reason of American demand. Besides, if the manufacturers of Britain should rise too high in price, why would they rise too high in price? Remember what we said earlier? There's not enough people. There's not enough. If the manufacturers of Britain should rise too high in price, foreigners who can sell cheaper will drive her merchants out of foreign markets. Foreign manufacturers will thereby be encouraged and increased, and consequently foreign nations, perhaps her rivals in power, grow more populous and more powerful, while her own colonies, kept too low, are unable to assist her or add to her strength. Man, there's a lot in this short paragraph right here. And it's really like one whole sentence. Okay, it said besides. So what does besides mean? That means you have to understand what was previously saying. Besides, if the manufacturers of Britain should rise too high in price, foreigners who can sell cheaper. So look at this is markets. It's markets, competition. The price is high, then you're gonna go to the more affordable vendor. Foreigners who can sell cheaper will drive her merchants out of foreign markets. Foreign manufacturers will thereby be encouraged and increased. Why? Because of the opportunity. there's some kind of commodity that's way too high, and this is an open market. Consequently, foreign nations, perhaps her rivals in power, grow more populous and more powerful, while her own colonies, kept too low, are unable to assist her or add to her strength. This means it is, or this, it means it is. It is an ill-grounded opinion that by the labor of slaves, America may vie, that means, compete, may possibly vie in cheapness of manufacturers with Britain. I'm gonna read that again. It is an ill-grounded opinion that by the labor of slaves, America may possibly compete in cheapness of manufacturers with Britain. Okay, so you're not gonna compete. You're not gonna compete in prices of manufacturers with Britain with slaves, with slave labor. The labor of slaves can never be so cheap here as the labor of working men is in Britain. Okay, I'm gonna read that again. The labor of slaves can never be so cheap here as the labor of working men is in Britain. Anyone may compute it. Interest of money is in the colonies from 6 to 10%. Slaves, one with another, cost 30 shilling per head. Reckon then the interest of the first purchase of a slave, the insurance or risk on his life, his clothing and diet, expenses in his sickness and loss of time, lost by his neglect of business. Okay. Neglect is natural. See, this is a complete sentence. Then it puts a parenthesis, a little side point. Neglect is natural to the man who is not to be benefited by his own care or diligence. I'm gonna read that again. Neglect is natural to the man who is not benefited by his own care or diligence. Think about what they just said. Man, expense of a driver to keep him at work, and his pilfering from time to time, almost every slave being by nature a thief, and compare the whole amount with the wages of a manufacturer of iron or wool in England, you will see that labor is much cheaper there than it can ever be by Negroes here. Why then will America purchase slaves? Because slaves may be kept as long as a man pleases, or has occasion for their labor, while hired men are continually leaving their master, often in the midst of his business, and setting up for themselves. Okay, so what they're saying is, when you have a slave that is your quote-unquote worker, and he can't go anywhere. Whereas when you have a hired laborer, they can come and go as they please. Once the job is paid for, they don't have to come back, because there's no binding agreement. There's no kind of legal obligation or anything like that. So, that says a lot about just the nature of labor. So when we look at history, we need to take these things into account, because we don't. And I'm saying, like, we always have to think human nature. The problem with our society today is we have way too many people with an employee or a servant mindset, and not enough people wanting to be a master. And what I mean by that is, when you work for somebody, you're gonna get paid. Okay, they have to pay you, by collective bargaining and trade laws and all that. They have to pay you. But even if you don't produce on the level that they need you to produce to, you still have to get paid. Now, after they pay you, they can wipe their hands of you and just send you on your way. But either way, that's money that they lost with your inadequate production and labor. So, I think that had a lot to do with this thing about this going back and forth about slavery. So I think that's something to think about. Now, we are reading to practice. So when you're reading, pay attention to these punctuations. And, you know, like I said, when we're practicing, we're going to increase our vocabulary. It's important that you know what words mean and you know how to use them in the proper context. If you do that, I'm telling you, your whole academic career will be much easier, as I've learned. So, but yeah, that was an observation concerning the increase of mankind, peopling of countries, etc. We read 1, 2, 3. So we read about 3 pages of that, and let's see, there are. I think we're gonna finish reading this another time, but this was really interesting. But you basically you get what he's trying to say. He's talking about, you know, population increase in regards to labor and resources and just economic opportunity. So that's pretty much what he's saying so far. Now there's more. He could be saying more, but that's the beauty of the car section. See, the secret is that you don't always have to know the main idea of the passage. That is the secret to the car. Sometimes it's just gonna ask you a question about a small detail, and you have to pick that up. So that's what I'm saying. Like, practice. What's the word? Practice assimilating, you know, what you're hearing as you hear it. So, you know, you gotta think and process quickly. That's the whole point of these exercises. So I hope you got something from this, and I'll see you in the next video.